Good morning, first graders. Today, you are learning all about the Arctic. In reading, we're going to read an article, a reading passage about the Arctic, and then we're going to answer some questions to show that we understand what we just read. So read along with me. A cold place to live. Make sure your voice sounds smooth. The Arctic is a place on Earth. You can see it on the top of a globe. The North Pole is in the Arctic. The Arctic is a habitat. A habitat is where plants and animals live. Polar bears and seals live in the Arctic. Very few people live there. The weather in the Arctic is very cold. Much of the land has ice on it all year. Ice is frozen water. Even the ocean in the Arctic is full of ice. Now that we read, let's answer some questions to show that we understand. One helpful reading strategy is to go back and find text evidence in the text to help you find answers. Go back, reread, and look where your answers are in the text. That's called text evidence. So let's try using that. Where can you find the Arctic on a globe? The bottom of the globe, the top of the globe, or the middle of the globe? Let's go back, reread, and see if we can find our answer. The Arctic is a place on Earth. You can see it on the top of a globe. Oh, there's our text evidence. I'm going to underline that. Readers underline information when they're answering questions. Underlining is a helpful strategy too. So, what is our answer? Where can you find the Arctic on the globe? We found it right in the text, the top of the globe. Good job finding that text evidence with me. Let's try that for question number 2. This text describes the Arctic habitat. What is a habitat? Is it an animal that has white fur? Is it the biggest city in the world, or a place where plants and animals live? Let's go back and look for text evidence. The Arctic is a habitat. Remember, we're finding out what a habitat is. A habitat is where plants and animals live. There's text evidence. There's our answer. A habitat is where plants and animals live. Let's go back and circle our answer. The text describes the Arctic habitat. What is a habitat? An animal that has white fur? Nope. The biggest city in the world? No. The text says a habitat is a place where plants and animals live. Did you see how going back, rereading, and finding answers in the text is a helpful strategy to help you answer comprehension questions? Number 3, very few people live in the Arctic. Which detail from the text tells us why very few people live in the Arctic? Which detail? The weather in the Arctic is very cold. Do very few people live in the Arctic because you can see it on the top of a globe? Or do very few people live in the Arctic because seals live in the Arctic? Let's go back and find that detail. Polar bears and seals live in the Arctic. Very few people live there. I'm going to underline that because this is what we're talking about. Very few people live in the Arctic, but the question is asking why very few people live there. And we need to find the key detail that helps us figure out why very few people live there. The weather in the Arctic is very cold. Could that be why very few people live there? Or is it because seals live in the Arctic? I don't think people wouldn't live somewhere because seals live there. The weather in the Arctic is very cold. Much of the land has ice on it all year. People can't live in ice. That is way too cold. Ice is frozen water. That's freezing. So one detail for why very few people live in the Arctic is because the weather in the Arctic is very cold. Thumbs up if you agree. Let's go back and look at our choices again. Which detail from the text tells us why very few people live in the Arctic? Because the weather in the Arctic is very cold. Because you can see it on the top of a globe. That wasn't a detail that had to do with that. Or because seals live in the Arctic. What do you guys think? Yes, it's because the weather in the Arctic is very cold. That detail helped us learn why very few people live there. Good job helping me find the evidence in the text. Number 4. What is a cold place to live mainly about? Oh, we talked about this, the main topic. What is it mainly about? I don't think we need to go back in and reread for this. Maybe we do, but let's see. Is it mainly about animals that live in the Arctic? Is it mainly about characteristics of the Arctic habitat? It did describe the Arctic habitat. It did talk about animals that live in the Arctic. It did mention some animals like seals, but was it mainly about animals that live in the Arctic? Or habitats around the world? If it was about habitats around the world, then it would have talked about other habitats like rainforests or deserts. But it didn't talk about other habitats. It only talked about the Arctic, so it can't be that one. I'm going to cross it out. Was it about animals that live in the Arctic? That was a detail, but it wasn't mainly about that. A cold place to live was mainly about describing the Arctic habitat, characteristics of the Arctic habitat. Do you agree? Beautiful. Now it's time to complete your reading task on your own. Your task: reread A Cold Place to Live. Remember, make sure your reading sounds smooth. Then answer the following questions in your journal. Go back and use text evidence to find your answers, just like we did together. Be sure to use the sentence starters to write your answers in full and complete sentences. Number 1, what is on much of the land and in the ocean in the Arctic? What is on much of the land and in the ocean in the Arctic? So use this sentence starter to write in full and complete sentences. On much of the land and in the ocean in the Arctic is, go back in the text and find out. Number 2, what did you learn from A Cold Place to Live? Name one fact you learned. And start your sentence like this. I learned that. And then tell us one fact you learned. Number 3, what is the weather like in the Arctic? Start it like this. The weather in the Arctic is, go back in the text and find out what the weather's like. Then, if you have time, draw a picture of the Arctic and color it. Please upload your work to Google Classroom so your teachers can see. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Have fun learning about the Arctic today.